Ulaanbaatar, the capital city of Mongolia, where half of Mongolia's 3 million population lives, is one of the most polluted capitals in the world. So in this video, we will explore why, and at the same time, we'll learn about air pollution and its impact on human health. And we'll also learn about different types and sources of pollutants and their detrimental effects on physical health, mental health, and mortality. Please make sure to stay until the end of this video because we'll have some prominent international scientists and local Mongolian academics as a guest speaker at Mongol Academy Hub. And they will be sharing with us some intriguing scientific evidence about air pollution and its impact on human health. Mongolia is a country located in Northeast Asia, situated between two neighboring countries of China and Russia. In the 2 decades, Mongolia has undergone through a large scale of development, particularly in the mining sector. But the Mongolian government was very weak to regulate the mining development, which has significant effect on environment and air quality. Both the mega mines and small-scale mining operations in Mongolia lead to increased levels of silica dust and fine particulate matter in the air, especially from poorly maintained mining sites and also the heavy truck traffic driving around the mining sites. Although this is not the most prominent cause of pollution in Mongolia, this leads to the destruction of rural pasture land for herders and intense desertification, which eventually lead to increased human migration from rural to the urban cities, especially to the capital city, Ulaanbaatar. Despite the fact that Mongolia is one of the most sparsely populated countries on the planet in terms of population to land mass ratio, the urban cities in Mongolia, in particular the capital city Ulaanbaatar, accumulate an increasingly disastrous amount of air pollution because of the climate and weather conditions, and also at the same time because of the increased rural to urban migration that has been taking place for the past 2 decades. The extreme climate condition is one of the primary factors contributing to air pollution in urban complexes in Mongolia. The monthly average air temperature has a minimum of -21 Celsius in January, and in winter months the temperature can drop as low as -40 degrees Celsius. So staying warm is a basic necessity to survive in such a cold and harsh condition for the Mongolian people. The long winter and heavy cold and air masses settled around Ulaanbaatar increase the duration of residential heating. Mongolia's current energy source is completely coal-based, and many residents who live in Ger districts are not connected to the central heating system and still use a traditional stove that burns large amount of coal, sometimes raw coal, which is unwashed and unprocessed. The smoke and haze that emerge from the mass burning of coal coalesce in the sky, and this condition causes the level of particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10 to skyrocket in Ulaanbaatar. That's why Ulaanbaatar is one of the most polluted capitals in the world. On the coldest days of the year, daily average of particulate matter 2.5 pollution levels reach 687 micrograms per cubic meter. That means that it exceeds 27 times higher than the level the World Health Organization recommends as safe.
The World Health Organization's current recommended limit for PM level is 5 micrograms per cubic meter according to their latest revision in 2021. Before 2021, it was 10 micrograms per cubic meter. So why the World Health Organization significantly increased the threshold? Based on what medical evidence did the WHO increase the stringency? Is it because what constitutes unsafe levels of air pollution is still evolving? We addressed these questions to Professor Michal Krzyzanowski, who is an environmental epidemiologist, currently holding an honorary position of a visiting professor at the School of Public Health of the Imperial College London. Professor Krzyzanowski is active as an expert consultant for WHO, UN, and other organizations on health aspects of air pollution in Europe, Asia, and Africa. He is a member of the WHO Air Pollution and Health Scientific Advisory Group, as well as the WHO Air Quality Guidelines Development Group.
We say there is no threshold. The WHO is not using the threshold anymore. This is an old concept. We know that everybody has some threshold. There are people who are very robust, which have no problems in higher pollution, but there are also some people in the population who are sensitive to pollution at the very low levels also. So in population, we don't have a threshold. We have millions of thresholds, and we have to think about the most vulnerable if we are talking about air pollution, because everybody is equal. We cannot say people with asthma are not important because they have symptoms at any level. We cannot say this. Children are very important, and children are more vulnerable than strong adults. Old people with cardiovascular disease, they are vulnerable group. But we have to take care of this vulnerable group as well. So we are not only thinking about the most robust, most healthy group of population, we talk about population as a whole. So there is no threshold. The WHO, World Health Organization, got a task already 40 years ago to establish what are the acceptable levels of air pollution. In the past, it was say what are the safe levels. Now we know that there is no safe level, but we need to say what is acceptable level, or what is the level for which we have evidence that there are health effects. And air quality guidelines, the first air quality guidelines was developed in 1987. So it's a long, long time ago. But then there was air quality guidelines in 2000, in 2006, and recently in 2021. And each was based on a growing body of evidence. And the most recent update, 2021 update, was based on thousands of studies, new studies, which were performed after the guidelines from 2006 were produced. And those new studies were performed, among the others, in places where air pollution levels are very low. So we could evaluate the effects at very low levels of pollution. And based on those studies and using very formal method, very formal approach, we establish those guidelines levels at relatively low level of pollution. And WHO says that this objective, if a population gets to those levels, low levels of exposure, then health effects will be reduced. And the levels are 5 micrograms per cubic meter. There's really very low. What I have seen from the data you sent for Mongolia, for Ulaanbaatar, it will be like 20 times less than measured in Ulaanbaatar. This annual average, we are not talking about daily peaks. Daily peaks will be much, much higher, and the guidelines are also a little bit higher. But there is a pollution level which we should reach to eliminate most of health problems.
What is the level of PM10 and PM2.5 in Mongolia? What are the common sources that emit PM10 and PM2.5 in Mongolia?
Улаанбаатар хотын агаарын бохирдлын их үүсвэрийг бол ерөнхийд нь нөгөө дулааны цахилгаан станц, тэгээд нөгөө автомашин.
The air pollution in Ulaanbaatar city generally comes from thermal power plants, cars, Gare districts, and other sources. Of these, especially the thermal power plants account for the majority. And there is a figure that approximately 44% of air pollution comes from thermal power plants. Gare districts account for 30%, Cars and other sources account for 8.7%. If we subtract the 40% of the thermal power plant from this data and consider the remaining 60% to be 100%, the majority of air pollution comes from households living in GER districts, and it has been indicated as 55.6% according to the latest data, and 30% from automobiles, and the remaining 15.5% of air pollution comes from other sources. These figures have been determined by research conducted by both Mongolian and international researchers. The primary pollutants of air pollution include particulate matter, fine particles, or PM2.5, coarse particles, or PM10, and other toxic gases such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and ozone. These are called primary pollutants. If we compare the average concentration of air pollutants with the previous years, between December 2022 and January 2023, PM2.5 increased by about 8%, nitrogen dioxide by 6%, and sulfur dioxide by 4%.
Яг агаарын үндсэн бохирдуулагч. Гэхдээ одоо 22 оны 12 дугаар сараас 23 оны 1-р сарын хоорондох энэ агаар бохирдуулагч бодисуудын дундаж агуулмжийг ингээ харьцуулаад үзэхээр PM2.5-ийн хэмжээ бол нэг ойролцоогоор 8% ч юм уу те. Азотын давхар эсэл бол 6%, хүхэрлэг хий хэмжээ бол нэг 4%-аар ихссэн тийм үзүүлэлт гарсан.
In addition to PM10 and PM2.5, there are other pollutants with the strongest evidence for public health concern, such as carbon monoxide, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Many of you may be familiar with all these chemical pollutants. Now, let's get some basic understanding of these pollutants and their impact on people's health.
We have such guidelines for the most common air pollutants. I mean, those to which most of the population, global population, is exposed. And at the most, I would say, dangerous, resulting in most of the health effects are those particulate matter. These are small particles and particles of the size of 2.5 microns. You cannot see it by eye. They are 25 times smaller in diameter than a human hair. There are very precise methods to measure the density of it, but they are very small. They are composed of various substances. They have various chemical and physical properties. But until now, we have big problems in distinguishing which composition is the best predictor of health problems. Looks like all kinds of particles have similar health effects. For the time being, the best measure is its diameter and the ability of the particles to enter into the body when we breathe, enter into the lungs, and not only to the lungs, but they are so small that they are able to penetrate through the alveoli to the bloodstream and actually cause problems in the entire body. Other pollutants, like nitrogen dioxide, it is a gas which is produced during combustion. Each combustion produces nitrogen oxides, which immediately are transformed in the air to nitrogen dioxide. And what we know about nitrogen dioxide are the respiratory problems. There are probably more problems, but they are still investigated. We have pollutants like carbon monoxide, CO. This pollutant known for a long time. Again, it is produced in combustion, and it is affecting transport of oxygen in the body. And it can be very common cause of death in people, especially indoors. So if you probably know about it, it's in various situations when you don't ventilate the indoor spaces and you have some smoldering fire, then CO is not escaping from the room and people can be intoxicated and can die. So we have guidelines for this carbon monoxide as well. There are other pollutants. The list is much longer, but they are more related to specific sources, specific industrial sources or specific processes. So I'm not talking about those because I think there is a priority. Priority is to address particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, certainly carbon monoxide in indoor spaces. So yeah, the list of pollutants is longer. It's very common to focus on the source of pollution. And in situations like in Mongolia and in many other countries, the main source of air pollution is combustion of fossil fuels.
So this is the daily average concentration. In other words, it is the daily average concentration as measured by air quality monitors stationed in Ulaanbaatar city. There are currently 17 air quality monitoring stations in Ulaanbaatar. Before, there were only 12 automatic air quality monitoring stations. These graphs show daily average concentration as measured by air quality monitoring stationed in the most polluted areas, such as Gare districts and the neighborhoods surrounding the city center. As indicated by the blue line in this graph, in 2014, we had almost 1,000 micrograms of PM2.5 and PM10, and it continued to increase and reach the peak in 2018. From 2018 leading up to the winter of 2019 and 2020, the concentration of PM2.5 slightly decreased, and in the year of 2022 and 2023, it keeps gradually increasing due to the increases of sources of these pollutants. As PM2.5 decreased, the problem we faced in return was that sulfur dioxide, or SO2 content, significantly increased. As shown in this graph, the black line represents sulfur dioxide, or SO2, and the annual average concentration of SO2 considerably increased in previous years, exceeding the accepted level. So, in 2020, it even doubled, reaching to the level of 200 micrograms in 2021, and 250 micrograms in 2021. And I assume that it might be at a similar level this year because we haven't received the complete data for this year. So it is true that other types of pollutants have increased. When we determine the air quality, we take into consideration the extent to which these pollutants exceed the accepted level. So we determine the air quality through the concept of air quality index without expressing through each pollutant individually. In other words, the air quality is determined through a unified parameter that examines the extent to which it is quality air or poor quality air. According to the Air Quality Index, before the introduction of improved coal briquette burning, the main pollutant affecting air quality was definitely PM2.5 content. But since the introduction of improved coal briquette, the Air Quality Index has improved as PM2.5 content has decreased to a certain extent, but the content of sulfur dioxide, SO2, increased. If we determine the air quality index by sulfur dioxide content only, the SO2 content increased 4 and 5 times. In 2019, it used to be 50 to 60 micrograms, but now it is around 250 to 300 micrograms. In terms of negative effects, PM2.5 affects the respiratory tract, while sulfur dioxide, due to its gaseous quality, causes acute respiratory inflammation.
Одоо энэ 19 оны үед бол нэг 50-60 микрограмм метр куб байдаг гэсэн байгаа. За одоо болохоор 250-300 орчим болсон гэсэн. За тэгээд юу н сөрөг нөлөөллийн хувьд бол мэдээж та PM2.5 бол нөгөө имсгалаар дамжаад шүн сөрөг нөлөө үзүүлдэг юм сөрөг нөлөө ихтэй. SO2 болохоор ихий байдалтай учраас дахиад цаашаа имсгалын зам нэвтрэхээр имсгалын зарчмыг үүсгдэг гэдэг дараач нөлөөллүүдийг бол үзүүлдэг.
How does the seasonal air pollution impact on people's health, quality of life, and life expectancy?
First of all, this safe or unsafe level of exposure. Already for a long time, for several decades, we know based on scientific studies, mostly epidemiological studies, that the intensity of effects of air pollution exposure are proportional, more or less, to the exposure. So it means the higher concentrations of air pollutants we are breathing, the more, let's call it, dangerous it is. What does it mean, dangerous? Dangerous means that this air pollution or air pollutants are causing some changes in our body and in our health. This can be changed very sudden, I mean, from one day to the other, or from even 1 hour to another hour. But in most cases, those changes occur over a long time. So this pollution is damaging slowly, constantly our health. Everybody dies, but the question is when dies. So this effect is that we die earlier than we would have died without the exposure. So there is a big picture of this. And now about those levels of exposure. Based on those studies, we see those effects appear even at very low levels of exposure. We recognize that even at very low levels of common air pollutants, such as particulate matter, the fine particulates, PM2.5, or nitrogen dioxide, we see the effects which grow in intensity with growing exposure, but already at very low levels, we have the effects. The problem is that most of the health risk of particulate matter is due to long-term exposure. At each stage of life, our health is affected. So when a child is born, is affected the development of the lungs, development of the nervous system is already affected. The lung problem we know for 20, 25 years. But recently we also found that children affected by air pollution have a slower cognitive development, so they learn slower. And then when people grow and when adults are exposed, the effect comes visible in the middle age when the cardiovascular problems occur, where chronic obstructive lung disease appears, and in some people it's also lung cancer appearing. So the effects are similar to the tobacco smoking, which we know as well. So at the end, the most common are increased incidence of myocardial infarction, strokes, and other cardiovascular problems, respiratory problems, and lung cancer. And in the end, mortality is accelerated. The populations exposed to high pollution level live shorter, and their life in good health is shorter. So there are problems on population level and individual level, and this is due to particulate matter, which should be kept as low as possible.
My name is David Warburton. I'm a professor of pediatrics at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles and also at the University of Southern California. And I've been working in Mongolia and with Mongolians for 20 plus years. And what we've tried to do is visit at least once a year and use that opportunity to observe what's going on in the country and train local people, encourage local physicians and scientists to count what's in front of them and identify their major health problems. But we, working with the Mothers and Children's Hospital in UB, we discovered that the seasonal pollution has a very significant effect on women and children. And of course, in Mongolia, women and children comprise a great many of the population. So it's half the population are female roughly, and children are, or people under the age of 25, 26, that's 60% of the population. So the impact is disproportionately falls on women and children. And the things that we've noticed are that it makes pregnancy difficult to achieve. It makes holding on to the pregnancy difficult. It also affects birth outcomes and things like that. So we're still studying this, but we think we know what the cause is, and it's burning coal for domestic heating primarily. I mean, the country is extremely cold in the winter, -40. I've been there when it's been -60, which was cold. And if you don't burn something at the present time, your family is going to die. So people burn coal because that's what's available in the city. We did do a study where we correlated the peak air pollution in the winter with common congenital malformations. So cleft palate and congenital heart disease are the two most common major congenital malformations. And so there are enough of them to be able to do statistics. And so what we did was we went to the birth defects registry and compared the time of conception of these children to the pollution rate. And what we found is that when children are in utero at about 4 to 8 weeks gestation during a major pollution event, that the incidence of cleft palate and congenital heart disease, which only appears later when they're born, right, detected later when they're born, but there is a high correlation between the high pollution and the appearance of these congenital anomalies.
In terms of air pollution, Mongolia has been ranked as the country with the most air pollution in the world for the past few years. And Ulaanbaatar has become one of the 10 cities with the most air pollution in the world. This is something that is of great concern to the citizens. With regards to scientific research on air pollution in Mongolia, we've done a great job over the last 30 years. Based on my review of 40 researches by scientists, for example, Dr. Kupel conducted research on the effects of air pollution on children's health in Mongolia early in 1993. Between 2008 and 2016, a project called Clean Air Fund was implemented with the help of funding from the United Nations and donor countries that support us. In total, 93 billion turiks were spent to implement the project. A lot of research has been conducted within the framework of this project. So, if we look at these 40 research studies, it has been concluded that air pollution has a 30 to 60% effect on the birth defects and early miscarriages in our country. Also, in winter, when there is heavy air pollution, miscarriages increase 4 times compared to other seasons. In 2023, 16,000 people fell ill with respiratory diseases, which is 9,891 more than the previous year. Also, according to the studies released by the National Center for Health Development, more than 37,000 people got ill with diseases related to air pollution compared to the previous year. If we look at the statistics of the National Center for Health Development, 465 children were born with birth defects last year. Population growth has also decreased. The population growth rate has decreased to 1.7, but the number of children with birth defects has increased. So there are a lot of sad figures like this.
Хүн одоо хүн амын өсөлт буурсан. Хүн амын өсөлтийн коэффициент бол 1.7-оор буурсан мөртлөө төрөлхийн гажигтай хүүхдийн тоо нэмэгдсэн байгаа байхгүй. Тэгэхээр энэ мэдчлэн сэтгэл өвдгсөн тоонууд маш их байна.
Are there seasonal variations of concentrations and emissions of these pollutants? To what extent the geographic, topographic, and climate conditions affect the concentration and emissions of PM10 and PM2.5 in Mongolia?
Тэгээд юу орон зайн давхалт гэдэг
In terms of spatial distribution, air pollution has no borders, especially for the city of Ulaanbaatar. Air pollution increases in the winter months. Residents of Ulaanbaatar complain that they are living in the Death Valley, but they forget about air pollution when the spring comes, especially with the Lunar New Year celebration in the spring. So there are several factors affecting this condition. Air pollution in Mongolia is seasonal. Why is there more air pollution in winter? Ulaanbaatar is considered to be one of the coldest capital cities in the world due to its geographical features, especially the fact that it is located at an altitude of 1,300 meters above sea level, and the territory of Mongolia experiences the Siberian anticyclone called Siberian high pressure. This leads to the formation of stable high atmospheric pressure in winter, and a massive collection of cold, dry air is accumulated in Mongolia, and an intense inversion occurs. Inversion means air temperature lapse rate. In other words, during an inversion, warmer air is held above cooler air and traps air pollution such as smog close to the ground for a relatively long period.
Тэгэхээр энэ саяны тайлбарч хэлсэнчлэн энэ газар орчимд эрчимтэй инверс гадаргууд ойр оршиж байгаа дулаан агаарын давхраг бүтэн агаарын энэ давхрагтай харьцнаас үсэж байгаа энэ давхраг инверсийн давхраг тогтдог нь бол тэр их агаарын бохирдлыг харьцангуй удаан хугацаанд байх нөхцөлийг бүрдүүлээд байгаа юм.
And so each family that lives in a ger or in one of those wooden houses burns about 4 tons of coal a year. So, and that's 250,000 households. So that's 1 million tons of coal getting burned every year. The smoke goes up the flue from the Mongolian stove and gets into the atmosphere. And then because Ulaanbaatar is in the Tool River Valley, the pollution sticks around because there's not much air exchange. And so 80% of the wintertime pollution in UB is caused by coal burning. And that's the biggest problem. So if we could get rid of the coal burning, we would have some improvement.
We have now learned that coal-burning stoves in the Gare districts during the cold season is one of the major sources of air pollution in Ulaanbaatar. Because Gare districts are not connected to the central heating system, the households in Gare districts burn raw and unprocessed coal in often a primitive stove. In 2019, as part of the nationwide initiative to reduce air pollution, the Mongolian government introduced coal briquettes and implemented a citywide ban on the use of raw coal for heating and cooking. Coal briquettes are now being used in Ulaanbaatar in place of raw coal. Compared to raw coal, the briquettes emit less smoke and ash. But since the implementation of the briquettes in 2019, sudden, unexpected and unexplained deaths have increased among the household members who live in Gare districts. As reported by Mongolian mainstream news outlet, Daily Newspaper, it was reported that in 2023, 53 citizens died due to the following symptoms that include headache, weakness, dizziness, drowsiness, and loss of consciousness. The number of such incidents increased by 20 to 30% compared to the previous years. These symptoms are labeled as wugar poisoning in Mongolia. What is wugar? What constitutes wugar? Our guest speakers gave their expert opinions regarding this issue and explained why the coal briquettes that were supposed to reduce the air pollution caused the number of unexpected sudden deaths among the households in Gare districts. Let's listen to their explanations.
First of all, there is nothing like smokeless coal. There is a propaganda. When you have a combustion process, there is smoke. You can see the smoke or you don't. It depends on the size of the particles and color of particles. And in those more advanced stoves, you have better combustion, and indeed, you don't see this soot, the black carbon Yeah, the black, which you can smell it on your face. You don't see it because it's very small and doesn't have to be black. What is emitted in this combustion, and if you describe the symptoms, headache and dizziness, it is carbon monoxide. It's exactly the symptoms of carbon monoxide intoxication. And the smoke detectors are not sufficient for this, because smoke detectors detect the haze, this black smoke, because there's optical device. But they are very simple and very low-cost devices which detect carbon monoxide. And I suspect that when people are using those briquettes, they also try to make their houses or gears better insulated, because they want to. I know that you have minus 40 degrees Celsius degrees. It is cold. I know. So you try to insulate your or gear as much as possible. But in doing so, you prevent ventilation. And this carbon monoxide is not escaping well enough. And it is exactly what happens indoors. If the stove is correct, it is insulated, the stove is insulated itself. So the carbon monoxide can go out of the chimney. But sometimes it is not, depends on the chimney, and then it gets into the living area. It's a bit heavier than the air, so it stays low in places where people sleep, and people are being intoxicated, and people are dying. In Poland, there is something like 500 deaths per year due to CO intoxication. It is invisible killer. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it. You just feel dizzy, and if you stay too long means an hour, 2 hours, you die. Unless you get immediately rescued to the fresh air, sometimes to the hospital. As soon as your brain is affected, if the oxygen is not penetrating to your brain, instead of oxygen, you get carbon monoxide. Sorry, it is one-way ticket. So if you have this problem, a way out are those CO sensors, small devices which start beeping when they detect carbon monoxide. WHO guidelines include guidelines on carbon monoxide. There is very well established science, and of course, the better stove and insulation of the stove and ventilation of the stove is essential, but in all places where you have such stove, you should have this CO carbon monoxide detector, which is warning people that something is wrong in the air, and this wrong means it is really dangerous. It is deadly. Immediately. You don't have to wait 2 years. You die on the spot.
The government has tried several things. A few years ago, the World Bank gave them a lot of money to exchange stoves. It's called the Stove Exchange Project. And unfortunately, it failed to improve pollution very much because the Turkish stoves that they bought aren't hot enough for a Mongolian. So that was a failure. And recently, the government has tried a newer kind of coal, which is compressed coal dust, which is called san coal, or healthy coal. Unfortunately, san coal has worked in some respects. It's reduced atmospheric particulates by about 30%. The problem is it's 30% of a hell of a lot. In the winter with conventional coal, the pollution got up to 1 gram per cubic meter. And the WHO's safe level is 15 micrograms per cubic meter. So it's like hundreds of times above the safe level. But any improvement is worth having, and 30% is something. Now, the other thing that happened is that the composition of the coal changed, because going from raw coal to sand coal, the sulfur composition is much higher in sand coal than in raw coal. And so SO2 levels, sulfur dioxide levels, have gone up 6 or 7-fold. And the other challenge is that this coal burns hotter than raw coal, and therefore makes more carbon monoxide. And there's been a much higher incidence of people getting carbon monoxide poisoning, and so tens of deaths from that in people living in gurs and wooden houses. So the challenge is, what do we do now? Okay, what can we possibly do?
Right.
I think if we look at the experience in London, where I came from originally, in the 1950s and 60s, we finally came to the realization that you have to stop burning coal altogether. And the way it was done in London was we switched to electric heat, oil heat, and insulated people's homes, double glazing, insulation in the attic, and stopped burning coal. And that really solved the problem pretty much. You still have traffic and you still have industry, but the coal burning went away, and that made the huge difference. If we could do that in UB, 80% of the pollution in the winter would go away.
In
November 2016, the Mongolian government established the National Committee for Air Pollution Reduction. This national committee leads the development of the national program to reduce air pollution from 2017 to 2025. As part of this measure, a decision was made to ban transporting raw coal into Ulaanbaatar, starting from May 15, 2019. So, coal briquette as improved fuel is currently being used in place of raw coal in Ulaanbaatar. Looking at the level of chemical contents in the fine particles since the beginning of using improved fuel or coal briquettes, there is a certain decrease in the amount of particulate pollution. But unfortunately, the amount of sulfur dioxide has significantly increased. In addition, the amount of volatile organic compounds and polycyclic aromatic carbons haven't decreased. So improved fuel as coal briquette is not a suitable solution.
Түүнээс гадна бэлгэмхийн органик нийтлүүдийн хэмжээ тэгээд тэр олцгол ароматик нүүрсийн хэмжээ бол буураагүй. Тэгээд энэ сайжруулсан туршилт яг аварсан шийдэл биш байгаа даа.
Тэгээд сайжруулсан шахмал турш хэрэглэхээр бас яг сайн.
Although the PM2.5 content was reduced since we started using the improved fuel of coal briquettes, there were many other adverse effects. For example, there have been many acute poisonings caused by exposure to carbon monoxide, especially by indoor carbon monoxide poisoning, which resulted in untimely deaths for some citizens. This is definitely one of the serious side effects to watch out for. I don't agree with the hypothesis that the content of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons has increased, because polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are in form of particulate matter. As the content of particulate matter decreases, the polycyclic hydrocarbon content decreases as well. Second, the main reason for the formation of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons is due to incomplete combustion. So, with the introduction of improved briquette coal, as it is dried coal, the combustion has improved to a certain extent, so that the amount of PM particles that are released into the air due to incomplete combustion has decreased. Therefore, I think that the content of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons has decreased to a certain extent.
Сайжруулсан түвшийг 2019 оноос хойш эхэлсэн.
Coal briquettes as an improved fuel has been used since 2019. In other words, they take the coked part of the coal called midline, separate the middle part, and mix it with the binder starch to make fuel. And this fuel technology has been lost today in Mongolia. Even in several Chinese studies conducted as early as 2010, the briquette coal increases polycyclic aromatic carbons irrespective of mixing with any type of stabilizers. We presented this issue at the press conference. This is an example of a country with a crisis of governance, a lack of justice, and when corruption is at such a high level, any initiated work is not done properly, and the country does not develop.
Хямрал одоо шудраг өсний одоо гачигдалд орсон. Авилга ийм өндөр одоо газар авсан тохиолдол бол ямар ч ажил хийгээд улс орон хөгждгүүн жишээг бол бусад орны жишгээр бид нар бүр мэдсэн шүү дээ.
We've heard that some of our guest speakers, especially the Mongolian academics, address the behavior and cultural practices of individuals and local households living in gayer districts. And also, we've heard that some of the Mongolian academics state the political corruption and inefficient government policies as a barrier to achieve the clean air in Mongolia. This leads to the next question of what hard and soft policies can the national government enact to change the individual's behavior, social and cultural practices in order to reduce air pollution in Mongolia. So let's listen to our scientists' and academics' opinions on this question.
So, one current idea is green housing. So there's one type of green housing are green apartment buildings. Like some of the newer apartment buildings that have been built in UB are green. They are heated by electricity. They're well insulated. And that's great. But not everybody wants to live in an apartment block. And then the other question you had was, how would you finance this? So one of the civic mistakes that was made in Mongolia was giving people virtually free property without having them do any kind of building code improvements to their property. So you still have a lot of housing lots in the Ger district with a Ger on it and a wooden house on it, but no toilet, no running water, and a lot of them still don't have electricity. So housing codes are something that in America and other countries that are further along in development, there are rules that you have to do certain things. So you have to install sewers. I had to do that at my house in California, actually, a few years ago. The state and the city made us join the sewer. You could have housing codes for insulation. That's the case in London now. You have to have double glazing or triple glazing, and you have to have insulation. So that could also be something that new construction, you could do this. And then the other thing is that in California and in the US generally, there are tax rebates for doing green development. So, for example, I put solar panels on my roof, and I got something like half the cost back as a tax rebate. So that's another thing that could be done to encourage people to do this. People are very smart in Mongolia. They are highly educated, very literate, and they know their math. They can do math, and they can add up the money. So they'll see the advantage of this. And on the other side, the government will be making money because they won't have to spend so much on healthcare, and people will be working. They won't be losing their tax revenue. Yeah. So those are some of the implications. The other thing is that property loans in Mongolia are really too expensive. I mean, I don't know what the current mortgage rate is there, but last time I asked, it was around 8 or 9% or something like that. And that's really too high. Nobody can really afford that much for a mortgage. They could probably do 5%, maybe. Because, you can calculate this. If you've invested $50,000, the payment at at 8%, it's going to almost be your entire income. So that's not going to work either. So you have to either that, or you have to make the amortization much longer. I mean, mortgages are normally 30 years, but you could make it 50. Or you could lease the properties. Another way of doing it would be to have manufactured homes that you could bring on a truck and get a crane and put it down on a foundation. And then you could scale it. You could have a factory that makes those, and it would bring the cost down. $50,000 was a custom built one-off. So if you're going to do thousands of them, you could probably cut the price by a third or something. The other thing is that the government would save money on electricity generation, because if people are consuming 20% of the electricity everybody consumes, that will cut electricity consumption substantially. So then you don't have to build new power stations because you're consuming less electricity. So these are some of the things that are attractive to think about.
So there is a problem with coal combustion, and if you change fuels, you must improve also the stove. Maybe this new fuel is used in not a properly adapted stove, and this ventilation of the stove is not sufficient, and then you end up with carbon monoxide intoxication. The problem with this advanced or not advanced stove might be that it's not the stove itself. It might be the chimney. We are talking about the fumes which come out of the combustion. And I suspect that if somebody invests in an advanced stove, when they install it, they also install this pipe, the chimney, and then it is sealed, it is properly done, and so on. But very often, if somebody cannot afford the new stove, they say, okay, I will buy just the new fuel. They don't have a proper chimney. And with new fuel or old fuel, the same situation would occur. If the fumes are penetrating from this chimney to the room, to the gear, then carbon monoxide is there, and carbon monoxide can kill. It's a complex. You have to look at the stove, at the chimney, and then ventilation. One thing I don't know about those briquettes is also they cooperate with the chimney. In some cases, some fuels have more soot or affect the ventilation through the chimney. If chimney is not clean, then the exhaust cannot go out easily, and maybe there is more exhaust with these modern briquettes or something like that. This I don't know. But in each case, when there is this kind of intoxication, the chimney should be inspected. Most countries, both in Germany and Poland, if we use fireplaces, if we use stoves, the chimneys must be checked every year. Must be. I mean, we have to have a chimney sweeper coming. They come by themselves and they go to the roof, they clean the chimney, and it's mandatory. You cannot skip it, such inspection every year. This is exactly because of the carbon monoxide risk intoxications. And I wonder if it is done every year in those units or gears. It probably is not.
In terms of legislations, between 1992 and 2016, the National Assembly issued 26 resolutions related to air pollution. The National Security Council issued 2 resolutions, one related to the implementation of the Clean Air Fund. The implementation of Clean Air Fund was complete in 2016, and in 2017, a national program to reduce air pollution was approved. The government issued a total of 24 resolutions related to air pollution. So we have enough resolutions within the legal framework, and we've been provided with enough technical assistance to reduce air pollution within the framework of international cooperation. Enough financial opportunities have been provided, and enough budget funds have been allocated to reduce air pollution. However, I believe that the reason why air pollution has not been reduced until today is because of the lack of optimal solutions to target the affected grassroots and the efficient governance and ineffective performance of implementing those national programs and resolutions. If we look at the national program to reduce air pollution, it states that it will be implemented according to 25 indicators. These indicators, for example, include reducing the number of chimneys, providing housing for people living in GARE districts, increasing the availability of public housing, reducing the number of vehicles emitting pollution. So there are many good things, and all the sources of air pollution are very well reflected in those indicators. So, if they are not being implemented, it means that the implementing agencies, the national government, and ministries are not doing their jobs. As an example, if we look at the money spent since 2017 to reduce air pollution, totally $1 billion have been spent to reduce air pollution. So, this is an amount of money that we could have built 2 or 3 thermal power plants. It was indicated in those resolutions and national programs that the alternative sources of energy would be resolved, but it still has not been resolved. So, there is no performance at all. What this means is that there are many loopholes in the law. For example, the Mongolian standard for outdoor air does not specify the tolerance level for all the chemicals of pollutants we have mentioned above. So, it creates a condition as if there is no air pollution in Mongolia. There should also be indoor air quality standards. There are no such standards in Mongolia. The researchers of the National Public Health Center have already studied this issue and determined the accepted level of indoor and outdoor air pollutants. So, when they submit their proposal to renew the national standard, the proposal is being ignored by authorities. So, there is a crisis in our governance. On the other hand, you are asking about soft policy to change people's behavior and social behavior, and interventions to increase the awareness of citizens regarding air pollution and its impact. Yes, we are doing all these interventions and educational outreach activities. Air pollution was publicized very well within the framework of the Clean Air Fund. Until recently, even when the improved fuel coal briquette was introduced, there was a significant increase in the number of deaths due to ugar. They even distributed ugar smoke detectors to households living in GARE districts. However, the coal briquette itself is not working. And secondly, the briquette coal emits other deadly pollutants. And soft loan to provide housing to the households living in GARE districts cannot reach to its target populations.
Байртаа болгох нэг ипотекийн зээл идэр чи оновчтой хүнээ олохгүй байна гэл ингээл бүх юм хэлхээтэй. Энэ
Recently, we found out from the coal hearing organized by Parliament that the government-supported fuel company had rewarded themselves with 1 billion tueriks for reducing air pollution in Mongolia. This has caused a lot of frustration among the general public. The government has been repeatedly taking short-term and medium-term measures to reduce air pollution. As part of such measures, they've replaced the traditional stoves with advanced stoves and replaced raw coals with coal briquettes as an improved fuel. However, there should be a certain kind of appropriate culture as a powerful source that shapes the way people behave and consume the products with regard to how to use the advanced stove, how to change the fuel they use, and how to use the improved fuel. In all these cases, knowledge is very important for people. So, even though we provide the people with relevant information to change their behavior and cultural practices, and shape the culture of consumption, and give knowledge of air pollution and its impact on human health, it seems to me that such educational outreach cannot reach out to all people.
Мэдээлэл олгож байгаа ч гэсэн нөгөө бүх хүмүүсийг хамарч чаддаггүй юм шиг байна. Ерөөсөө засгийн газрын зүгээс
Overall, the government needs to establish a politically independent task force to monitor the implementation of the decision made by the National Committee to reduce air pollution.
Хараат бус ажлын албыг л байгуулах хэрэгтэй. Тэр зүйл бол бас тодорхой хэмжээгээр үүдэн хүрнэ.
Бид нөгөө их усүрээ бууруулахаар одоо яг төлсөө сайжруулах.
We've been talking a lot about improving coal, reducing the source of pollutants, or stopping to burn coal and providing the heat with electricity. But if we do not insulate the house and the gear, we will never be able to achieve these solutions. Our citizens have relatively little understanding of insulation. Our traditional Mongolian gear is relatively weak in maintaining heat. Although we keep the fire at night, it gets very cold as soon as the fire dies out, so it requires to keep the fire constantly, even during the day. The more you insulate it well, the more we will reduce heat loss and the consumption of fuel will decrease. People make a lot of efforts to improve the house by using modern technologies that maintain heat. The government supports such efforts and provides various financing mechanisms such as green loans and green bonds, etc. These initiatives should be well advertised to reach out to many people. Secondly, economic incentives are also needed here. As it is a loan, of course a certain segment of population has problems in terms of financial ability to pay the loan. However, it is necessary to suggest that we can maintain the heat not only just by burning coal, but instead by using various innovative technologies to insulate our housing. And there are many measures that are being implemented by government, though.
There are ongoing public forums about what sources of energy alternative to coal could be a better solution to Mongolia. There is a proposal to build hydroelectric power on the Ulaanbaatar River in northern Mongolia, but the work was put on hold due to failure to negotiate with Russia as it is close to the Russian border and Lake Baikal in Russian Far East. Another source of energy that receives much public debates is to build nuclear power plant. Mongolia has substantial known uranium resources, but does not currently have nuclear energy. Therefore, the Mongolian government is exploring tentative plans to build a nuclear power plant. This proposal has also received much support from the World Nuclear Association. We addressed the question of what sources of energy alternative to coal could be a better solution to achieve clean air in Mongolia. We've got very diverse but interesting opinions from our guest speakers. Let's check them out.
As I said, I'm not an expert on it. I have opinions, so don't catch me on the words here, but I have read various assessments of risks coming from nuclear plants and other risks and other ways of producing energy. And indeed, in comparison with conventional power plants, first of all, it would be fantastic if we could use electricity to heat our houses and as a main source of energy. Because this really, at the end point, it is a clean way of helping us in life. We have to have some heating. We have to have ways of cooking food and be comfortable and also use energy for industry and stuff like this. So at this moment, it looks like electricity is the optimal solution. The question is how to produce this electricity. And there are discussions on various ways. We now have very efficient and more efficient ways of producing electricity from renewable sources like wind and solar energy. Wind is something which is probably prevailing most of the year. The problem is that it's unstable source of energy. So even if you would have 90% of energy from wind, you still need 10% or 15% energy from somewhere else just to keep the network stable. And the discussion is what is the source of this. In Europe, there were various ideas. Some countries like Germany decided some years ago that the stabilizing element in the net would be gas, natural gas. But recently, in last 2 years, it appears that politically and economically, it becomes not very promising source. So there is a problem. French, on the other side, and also in America and many other sides, put their votes on atom energy. We know nuclear electricity generating plants. We know that it is quite difficult to build and quite expensive until now. The investment takes 10 years and needs a lot of money and technologies. But from the safety point of view, overall record of atomic energy is really incomparable if you count in a number of deaths caused by atomic energy compared to the conventional energy. You must remember that, so there's big orders of magnitude difference. The risks related to nuclear waste are well recognized, but there are technologies to deal with it. Storing underground is the most common way. And in densely populated countries like in Germany, the most contentious problem was the transport of the waste from electric power plants to the storage places. When there was a train going through densely populated area, and people protested and so on. But it was based on emotions rather than any evidence of real risk. It is true that this equipment and the waste will be radiating for hundreds of years, but if it is doing so underground in old mines, salt mines, and so on, it is affecting no one. And I must say, in a situation like in Mongolia, where you have plenty of areas which are not densely populated, or I would say empty, more or less, there are probably ways to store the waste underground or otherwise without affecting anyone. And even with the radiation problems, we forget that when there is an electric power plant fire using coal, there is a lot of radiation in coal. And because coal is a natural product, it contains a very small quantity of radioactive material. But if this coal is combusted, burnt in millions of tons, which you need for the big power plant, then the amount of radiation, ionizing radiation coming from this power plant is many times more than from electric power plant. People don't talk about it, but it is a fact. The radiation is still below so-called natural background. We are irradiated all the time because of not only the substances which are in the Earth's crust, but also by coming from the space. We are affected by ionizing radiation from the space all the time. Our bodies got used to it, still alive. So certain level of radiation is not affecting our health. So with all those arguments and the argument of well-being, I would say nuclear energy is something which is certainly a solution. The problem is the cost and technological effort. We know if technology is not good, we may have a catastrophe. The Japanese Fukushima catastrophe was really a big catastrophe and nuclear accident, but a number of people who died after this accident or due to the accident goes in hundreds, probably, or maybe less than 100. There are various estimates depending on definition, but there is still a fraction of number of people who are dying every year due to air pollution, classical air pollution. And Fukushima accident happened when there was an earthquake, one of the biggest earthquakes and the biggest tsunami we had in hundreds of years. So that was really extreme situation. It is true that there were some errors in the plant. There were some technical problems, things like this, it's true. But it was an extreme situation. And we are in the world which has to accept certain risks, and those risks are really minimal compared to the everyday risks we are bearing using conventional energy based on coal.
Улаанбаатарын хувьд бол нөгөө эрчим хүчний хангамжийн урт удаан хугацааны
For Ulaanbaatar city, it is necessary to implement a long-term solution for energy supply. We have 4 working power plants. In winter, these power plants supply residents of Ulaanbaatar with heat and hot water. Technical maintenance and renovations are carried out at certain levels. However, 45% of Mongolia's population is concentrated in Ulaanbaatar. So, Ulaanbaatar's energy and heat demand is increasing. Therefore, it is important to find the right solution for energy supply in order to meet this growing demand for energy and heat. So, within the framework of replanning Ulaanbaatar city, we are faced with the question of how to solve the energy supply for the Ger districts. It is necessary to find the solution to supply the Ger districts with the most reliable but clean energy and heating system.
яаж шийдэх вэ? Тэгэхээр энэ гэр хорооллыг хамгийн найдвартай гэхдээ яг цэвэр эрчим хүч улааны хүсэл холбох энэ асуудлыг шийдвэрлэх хэрэгтэй байгаа юм да. Эрчим хүчний хувьд бол яг талаар хүн болгоны
Everyone has different opinions about nuclear power plants. For me, as a researcher, a nuclear power plant produces a huge amount of energy using very little uranium. Starting from this year, Badrak Energy Resources Company has begun mining uranium deposits with the funding of the French government. So, now that a nuclear power plant model is a testament to a technical solution around the world, this idea is not a bad thing. But there should be a safe operation. Therefore, I think it is a possible solution to build an atomic power plant in Mongolia if we are able to maintain safe operations and introduce secure technology. For Mongolia, not very large-scale but small-size atomic power plants to meet the energy needs of the country could be a better solution.
Яг нөгөө нэг хэтэрхий том биш гэхдээ яг тухайн улс орныхоо хэрэгцээ шаардлагыг хангах яг тэр тооцоо хэрэглээ тэгээд тэр технологийн зөв шийдлээ олоод гэж яг энэ шийдлүүд бүр тодорхой байгаа. Тэгээд хэрэгжүүлээд явчих юм бол яг тийм боломжийн гэж үзтгэлтэй.
Яг хоо физикийн одоо тэр атомын станцыг бол мэдхгүй. Гэхдээ бол яг хоо
I'm not a physicist, so I don't know much about nuclear power plants. But there are nuclear power plants in Japan. And I myself visited a cancer hospital with a small nuclear power plant where a single molecule of radioactive atom is injected into a high-speed accelerator to kill tumors. So mankind has learned to use the radioactive atomic energy. But it is important to properly use it. Countries that use nuclear power plants are always developed countries. There are countries that have started operating atomic stations according to the safety standards. So, we have to follow the safety operations very well. We need to properly utilize scientific discoveries. Of course, there are certain phases prior to introducing any new scientific innovations into application, such as testing and evaluating the results to determine if they align with the expected outcome predicted by the hypothesis. If any new technological innovation is considered safe to pass that piloting period, most of our nuclear physicists believe that it is advisable to build a nuclear power plant using uranium in Mongolia. I am not an expert in this field, so I don't know for sure.
Can the general public and local communities in Mongolia get adequately engaged in the design and development of policies to reduce air pollution?
Mongolian people have been calling for action against air pollution in their own different ways by embracing their diverse talents, ideas, special needs, and professional occupations. One example is Oidov Vaanchig, who represents a team of entrepreneurs in Mongolia who have been trying to find the solution to the air pollution in Ulaanbaatar through their architectural design of eco-sustainable houses. Oidov Vaanchig, who has a physical disability, built an experimental house in Mongolia to address the critical issues of air pollution and social exclusion of people with disabilities, elders, and mothers with strollers. The eco-inclusive houses he constructed offers a proof of concept that socially inclusive and low-carbon construction is not only feasible, but also economically viable. In addition, the house serves as an educational platform, providing workshops and seminars on sustainable living, energy conservation, and inclusive design. Oidov collaborates with educational institutions and NGOs to offer training programs for students and professionals who are interested in learning about sustainable architecture, environmental health, and inclusive design principles.
Well, about myself, my name is Oidov. I'm owner of this house and actually half owner. Another half owner is my wife. And we live in Mongolia. Well, I was advocating for inclusion and accessibility for the last 15 years. This is one of the first factors. Secondly, I have 3 kids, and because UB is super polluted city, we had to have some kind of extra space where we could have fresh air. We decided to build a house, bought the land, but then overall, through the research, we found out that we have very bad electricity capacity. And definitely, I didn't want my wife working and making fire on the stove. So I made a bit of research and found out there is a certain technology that prevents you making fire, but nevertheless it gives you a very comfortable internal environment, temperature, and it's called passive technology, where the house is super insulated, keeps the warm inside. At the same time, it's very comfortable for everyone. So that was the 2 factors I decided to put in my house. And later on, the 3rd factor, which is defines my house, is also a laboratory house. I decided to build the house first is super insulated, very accommodate with the passive technology. Secondly, become very inclusive house. Since I built such a unique house, I decided to make it possible to learn for others, learn other people what does this inclusive house means and what does the energy efficient house means. Those 3 features define my house: energy efficient, inclusive, and laboratory house. We have about 300,000 care households in Ulaanbaatar surrounding, and most of them located in the west and northwest area of Ulaanbaatar, where actually the wind comes in. The backstory of the house is very much related with all my past 20 years of attempts and advocacies for inclusion and social participation, equal participation.
Another example is the modern ballet production called Life Element and Oxygen, created and staged by the Mongolian ballet dancers to call for action against air pollution in Mongolia. The life element Oxygen Ballet is about a little girl walking home from school, and a very severe cough makes her whole body shake, and all she dreams about is the clean air. The story of this ballet raises awareness about the urgent issue of air pollution and its impact on children's health, and communicates this action with the audience through their dance performance. Combining traditional and contemporary ballet genre, this production takes an innovative approach to fighting toxic air in Mongolia. The life element Oxygen Ballet production was supported by UNICEF and the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, and it is a timeless art of ballet and first of its kind to highlight environmental issues.